Alright, let me tell you about this one night that seriously messed me up for a while. It was one of those typical late night hunger runs, you know? When you're so tired you just want something fast and greasy. So I headed to the McDonald's near my place, figuring I'd grab a burger and be in and out in no time. But things didn't go as planned. It was around 11 p.m. and the place was nearly empty, which wasn't unusual for a weeknight. The drive-thru had a couple of cars, but inside it was almost dead. Perfect for a quick stop. I parked my car, walked in, and headed straight for the counter. There was a girl behind the register who looked like she couldn't care less about being there. I get it. Late shift at a fast food joint isn't exactly thrilling. I ordered my usual, a Big Mac, large fries, and a Coke. Comfort food, right? She mumbled something I didn't catch, but I just nodded and handed over my card. While I was waiting for my order, I noticed this guy sitting in the corner of the dining area. He was staring at me. Not in a casual, just happened to look up sort of way. He was full-on staring, like I was the only thing in the room. He was an older guy, maybe in his 50s, wearing this beat-up old jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. I tried not to make eye contact, but you know how it is. You can just feel asterisk when someone's watching you. It was giving me the creeps, but I shrugged it off, figuring maybe he was just some lonely guy with nothing better to do. My order came up pretty quick, so I grabbed my tray and picked a table near the window. I like to have a view outside, especially at night. I sat down and started eating, trying to focus on my food and not on the guy in the corner, but the whole time I could feel his eyes on me. I glanced over once and he was still staring. This time he had this weird little smile on his face. Not a friendly smile, more like a smirk. I was starting to feel really uncomfortable, but I told myself to just ignore it. I pulled out my phone, trying to distract myself, but every now and then, I'd sneak a peek in his direction. He hadn't moved. He was still just sitting there, watching me. The weirdest part was, no one else seemed to notice. It was like I was the only one who could see him. Then, as if things weren't creepy enough, another guy walked in. He was younger, maybe in his 30s, dressed in all black. He walked straight to the counter, but instead of ordering, he just stood there, looking around the place. And then he saw me, and I swear to God, he started smiling too, just like the old guy. At this point, I was feeling pretty freaked out. What were the odds that two people would act so weird in the same place at the same time? I tried to brush it off as some bizarre coincidence, but it was hard to ignore the feeling that something was really off. The guy in black finally ordered something, but he kept looking over at me while he was at the counter. When he got his food, he didn't sit down right away. Instead, he stood there for a second, scanning the room. Then he walked over and sat at a table that was just a few seats away from me, close enough that he could see me clearly, but not so close that it would be obvious. I was halfway through my meal, but suddenly I wasn't hungry anymore. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. But at the same time, I didn't want to make it look like they were getting to me. So I took a deep breath, tried to stay calm, and forced myself to keep eating. Then it got weirder. Another person walked in, a woman this time. She had this crazy hair, wild and messy, like she hadn't brushed it in days. She looked around the room, and when her eyes landed on me, she did the same thing. She smiled. Not a normal smile though. It was more like a knowing grin, like she was in on some kind of joke that I didn't get. She walked up to the counter, but instead of ordering, she turned and looked directly at me. I felt my heart skip a beat. This was too much. 3 people, all acting like they knew me, like they were expecting me to be there. It wasn't just a coincidence anymore. It felt like something else, something I couldn't explain. The woman finally ordered something, and when she got her food, she didn't sit down. She just stood there, holding her tray, looking around. I was ready to leave. I didn't care how it looked anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. I grabbed my stuff and stood up, trying to stay calm as I made my way to the trash bin to throw away my trash. As I walked past the guy in black, he turned his head to follow me with his eyes. The woman did the same thing, and so did the old guy in the corner. It was like they were all moving in unison, like they were somehow connected. My heart was racing. I threw my trash away and headed for the door, not even bothering to look back. When I got outside, I felt a bit of relief. The cold air hit my face and I took a deep breath. But when I looked back through the glass door, all 3 of them were standing now, just watching me. Not moving, not saying anything, just watching. I rushed to my car, fumbling with the keys. I managed to unlock the door and jumped in, locking it behind me. I looked back at the restaurant, and they were still there, standing at the door, staring at me with those weird smiles. It felt like they were daring me to come back inside. I started the car and peeled out of the parking lot. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding in my chest. I drove around for a while, trying to calm down before heading home. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see them following me. But there was nothing, just empty streets and the occasional car passing by. When I finally got home, I locked all the doors and windows and checked them twice. I sat on the couch, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It was like a scene from a horror movie, but this was real life. This was happening to me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound made me jump, and I kept replaying the events in my head. Who were those people? And why were they acting like that? It didn't make any sense. I kept thinking about their smiles, those creepy, knowing grins. It was like they were in on some kind of twisted game, and I was the only one who didn't know the rules. The next day, I told a couple of friends about it. They tried to brush it off, saying maybe those people were just messing with me, or maybe it was some kind of prank. But it didn't feel like a prank. It felt like something more sinister, something that I couldn't explain. I avoided that McDonald's for a while after that. I mean, can you blame me? Every time I thought about going back, I felt this knot in my stomach. But eventually, I convinced myself to return. I had to prove to myself that it was all just some weird, one-time thing. So, a few weeks later, I went back. I told myself it would be fine, that I was just overreacting. It was early evening this time, not late at night. I walked in, looked around, and everything seemed normal. Different staff, different customers. No sign of those three people. I ordered my food, sat down, and tried to relax. For a while it worked. I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing, or at least blown it out of proportion. But then, just as I was finishing my meal, I saw him, the guy in black. He walked in and sat down in the exact same spot he did last time. My heart sank. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But then the woman walked in. She looked around, saw me, and smiled. That same twisted grin. She didn't order anything this time. She just stood there, watching me. I felt trapped. I wanted to get up and leave, but I was frozen in place. And then, the old man walked in. He took his usual spot in the corner, sat down, and started staring at me again, just like before. It was like deja vu, but worse because now I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I don't know how long I sat there, staring back at them, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Were they following me? Had they been waiting for me to come back? What did they want? I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my stuff and practically ran out the door. I didn't look back this time. I just got in my car and drove, not caring where I was going. I just needed to get away. I haven't been back to that McDonald's since. I don't think I ever will. And to this day, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, waiting for me to show up again. Maybe it's all in my head, or maybe it's something else. I don't know. All I know is, I've never felt that kind of fear before, and I hope I never do again. It was a Friday night, and I was exhausted after a long week at work. All I wanted was some comfort food and a quiet evening to unwind. So I decided to hit up the McDonald's near my place. It was around 9 p.m., not too late, but late enough that the dinner rush had died down. I figured I'd grab my usual meal, eat in peace, and then head back home. When I got there, the place was pretty empty, just a couple of people sitting at the far end, minding their own business. The air was filled with that familiar smell of fries and burgers. It was almost comforting, like a reminder that no matter how crazy life gets, some things just stay the same. I went up to the counter, ordered a Big Mac meal, and a chocolate shake for good measure. The cashier was this young kid who seemed bored out of his mind, barely making eye contact as he took my order. As I waited for my food, I glanced around the place. The lighting was a bit dim, which was unusual because McDonald's is usually so bright you can see every speck of dirt on the floor. There was this strange vibe in the air, but I chalked it up to my own fatigue. Maybe I was just projecting my own tiredness onto everything around me. I grabbed my tray and found a seat by the window, far enough from the other people, but close enough to the exit just in case. I have this habit of always wanting to sit where I can see the door. Maybe it's paranoia or just a habit from watching too many crime shows. Either way, it gives me some peace of mind. So, there I was, unwrapping my Big Mac, when I noticed something odd. One of the guys sitting a few tables away kept glancing over at me. He was an older man, probably in his 50s, with a scruffy beard and a worn-out baseball cap. At first, I thought maybe he was just looking around, like people do when they're bored. But no, this guy was definitely staring at me. Every time I looked up, his eyes would dart away, but I could feel his gaze on me whenever I wasn't looking directly at him. It made me uncomfortable, but I tried to ignore it. I focused on my food, scrolling through my phone, trying to look as nonchalant as possible. But it was hard to enjoy my meal with this guy's eyes boring into me every few seconds. I started to get this uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, like something was off. The other person in the restaurant, a woman sitting by the wall, didn't seem to notice anything. She was busy with her phone, headphones in, completely oblivious to what was going on around her. I envied her ignorance. I wished I could just block out the world like that. After a few minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I glanced up again, and this time, I held his gaze. He didn't look away this time. He just stared back at me, this blank, almost empty expression on his face. It was unsettling. I felt this cold chill run down my spine, and I knew I had to do something. I wasn't about to sit there and be someone's entertainment for the night. I got up, tray in hand, and moved to another table, one that was out of his direct line of sight. I felt a bit safer there, but not much. I still felt his eyes on me, even though I couldn't see him anymore. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just a lonely guy, harmless and curious, but my gut was telling me otherwise. Then, things got weirder. I noticed the staff behind the counter kept glancing over at me too. It wasn't just the cashier. There was another guy in the back, probably the cook, who kept peeking out from the kitchen area. Every time I looked over, they would quickly turn away, pretending to be busy. It was like they were all in on some secret that I wasn't privy to, and it was making me more and more anxious. I tried to finish my meal as quickly as possible, but every bite felt heavy, like I was forcing it down. I just wanted to get out of there, but I didn't want to make it obvious that I was freaked out. I mean, it's a McDonald's, for crying out loud. It's supposed to be one of the safest, most mundane places you can go. I was about halfway through my burger when the man stood up. My heart skipped a beat. He picked up his tray and started walking towards the trash can, which just so happened to be near my table. I kept my eyes on my food, pretending not to notice him, but I was hyper aware of every movement he made. He dumped his trash, then hesitated, standing there for a moment. I could feel him looking at me again, and I felt this wave of dread wash over me. He walked past my table, and for a split second, I thought he was going to stop and say something, but he just kept walking, heading towards the exit. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, feeling a slight sense of relief. But then he stopped at the door, turned around, and looked directly at me. There was something in his eyes, something cold and calculating. He lifted his hand slowly, pointing at me with one finger, and mouthed something I couldn't make out. Then he turned and walked out into the night. I was frozen in place, my mind racing. What the hell was that? What did he want? I felt this urge to get up and follow him, demand to know what his deal was, but at the same time, every instinct was telling me to stay put, to not engage. The door closed behind him, and for a moment, everything was eerily quiet. Even the hum of the kitchen seemed to fade away. I looked around, and that's when I noticed something else. The woman who had been sitting with her headphones on was gone. I hadn't even seen her leave. One second she was there, and the next her seat was empty, her tray still on the table. It was like she had just vanished into thin air. I felt this creeping fear taking hold of me. I quickly finished my food, not because I was hungry, but because I needed to do something, anything, to feel in control. I got up and took my tray to the trash, glancing around one last time. The staff were still acting weird, still sneaking glances at me, like they knew something I didn't. I dumped my tray and headed for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I stepped outside and looked around, half expecting to see the man lurking somewhere in the parking lot, but he was nowhere to be seen. The night was dark and quiet, too quiet. I hurried to my car, got in, and locked the doors. As I drove home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me, but the road was empty. When I finally got home, I rushed inside and double-locked the door, my hands shaking. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was it all in my head? Was I just being paranoid? I spent the rest of the night jumping at every little sound, convinced that the man was going to show up at my door. But nothing happened. The hours dragged on, and eventually I managed to fall into a restless sleep. The next morning, I tried to shake off the events of the night before. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence, I told myself. Maybe that guy was just a creep, but harmless. But then I remembered the way the staff had acted, the way the woman had disappeared without a trace. It all felt too strange, too calculated. I went back to that McDonald's a few days later, not because I wanted to, but because I felt this need to understand what had happened, to see if maybe it was all in my head. But when I got there, the place was closed. There was a sign on the door that said, "Closed for renovations," but the building looked untouched, like no work had been done on it at all. I asked around, but no one seemed to know anything. The staff had just stopped showing up. The place shut down overnight. It was like it had never existed. To this day, I have no idea what really happened that night. I don't know who that man was, or why he was staring at me. I don't know why the staff acted so strangely, or why the woman vanished. But every time I pass by that empty building, I get this uneasy feeling, like I'm being watched, like they're still there, somewhere, waiting. And I can't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I was meant to be part of something that night. Something I narrowly escaped. But what? I don't know. And honestly, I don't think I want to find out. It was just another typical weekday evening. I had just finished a long shift at work and was craving something greasy and comforting. You know how it is, sometimes you just need a Big Mac to unwind. So I headed to the local McDonald's. It's that one on the corner, you know, the 24-hour one that's always got a few people in it no matter what time you go. It was around 9:30 p.m., not too late, but late enough that the dinner rush had died down. As I walked in, I noticed it was quieter than usual. There were only a couple of people scattered around the dining area. One guy was sitting near the entrance, hunched over his food, eating like he hadn't eaten in days. Another person, an older woman, was sitting in the far corner, staring out the window, not even touching her food. I shrugged it off and got in line. There was a young girl behind the counter. Looked like she was barely out of high school, giving me that "I don't want to be here" vibe. I ordered my usual, Big Mac, large fries, and a Coke. She took my order, but there was something off about her. She kept glancing over her shoulder toward the kitchen, like she was nervous or something. After a few minutes, she handed me my tray, and I made my way to a booth near the back. I sat down and unwrapped my burger, ready to dig in. But just as I took my first bite, I heard a noise coming from behind the counter. It was faint, almost like a low hum or a buzzing sound. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just one of the machines acting up. But then it got louder, like someone was running a vacuum cleaner back there. I glanced up, and that's when I noticed something weird. The girl behind the counter was gone. She had been standing there a minute ago, but now she was nowhere to be seen. The dining area was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop, and the only sound was that buzzing noise coming from the kitchen. I tried to shake it off and went back to my food, but the noise was getting on my nerves, so I decided to get up and see what was going on. As I approached the counter, the noise suddenly stopped, just like that. It was so abrupt that it made my heart skip a beat. I leaned over the counter, trying to see into the kitchen, but it was dark. I couldn't see a thing. "Hello?" I called out, half expecting someone to pop out and tell me everything was fine. But there was no response. Just silence. I was about to head back to my seat when I noticed something on the floor behind the counter. It was a puddle of water, or at least I thought it was water at first. But as I looked closer, I realized it was thicker, almost like oil. I felt this weird chill run down my spine. I don't know why, but I had this sudden urge to leave. Something wasn't right. As I turned to go back to my seat, I heard a faint creak. I froze, my eyes darting around the room. The door to the kitchen was slightly ajar now, just a crack, but enough for me to see a sliver of light coming through. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I walked over to the door and pushed it open. The kitchen was dark, except for a single light flickering overhead. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The place was a mess. The floor was sticky, the counters were cluttered with old wrappers and food containers, and that puddle of thick liquid was spreading across the floor. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice shaky. No answer. I took a step forward, my foot slipping slightly on the wet floor. I caught myself on the counter and cursed under my breath. That's when I noticed something else. There was a faint, almost metallic smell in the air. It reminded me of rust, or maybe blood. I couldn't tell. As I moved further into the kitchen, I spotted a door at the back. It was slightly open, just like the one I had come through. I hesitated, every part of me screaming to turn around and get the hell out of there. But something kept pulling me forward, like I had to know what was behind that door. I reached out and pushed the door open. It led to a small hallway, dimly lit by a flickering bulb overhead. The walls were lined with shelves full of cleaning supplies and old equipment. At the end of the hallway, there was another door, this one closed. I could hear something coming from behind it, like a low, muffled sound. I inched closer, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I placed my hand on the doorknob and turned it slowly. The door creaked open, and I peered inside. It was a storage room, filled with boxes and crates stacked haphazardly. But in the middle of the room, there was a figure. It was the girl from the counter. She was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled up to her chest, rocking back and forth. Her eyes were wide open, but she wasn't looking at me. She was staring at something in the corner of the room. I followed her gaze, but all I could see were shadows. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't respond, just kept rocking back and forth, her eyes locked on whatever was in that corner. I took a step closer, trying to get a better look, and that's when I saw it. There was something in the shadows. At first I thought it was just a pile of rags or something, but then it moved. It was subtle, just a twitch or a shiver, but it was enough to make me take a step back. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it wasn't just a pile of rags. It was a person. They were hunched over, their back to me, their clothes torn and dirty. I couldn't see their face, but I could hear this soft, wheezing sound coming from them, like they were struggling to breathe. I wanted to run, to get out of there as fast as I could, but I was frozen in place. Then, the figure turned. It was slow, almost mechanical, like they were moving in slow motion. As they turned, I could see their face, or what was left of it. It was covered in what looked like burns or scars, the skin blistered and raw. Their eyes were hollow, like they weren't really seeing anything at all. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. The girl on the floor didn't move, didn't even blink. She just kept staring at that thing, her eyes wide with terror. I backed out of the room, my heart racing. I turned and ran down the hallway, bursting through the kitchen door and back into the dining area. I didn't stop. I ran out the front door, into the parking lot, and kept running until I was halfway down the block. I finally stopped, gasping for breath, my mind racing with what I had just seen. I looked back at the McDonald's, the neon lights flickering in the night. I wanted to believe it was some kind of prank, or maybe I was just seeing things because I was tired. But the image of that figure in the corner, the way they moved, the look on that girl's face, I couldn't shake it. I never went back to that McDonald's. In fact, I avoided that whole area for a long time. Every time I thought about it, I felt that same chill run down my spine. I asked around, but no one seemed to know anything about what happened there. It was like the place just went back to normal, as if nothing had ever happened. But I know what I saw. And I'll never forget that feeling, that sense of something dark and twisted hiding just beneath the surface of what seemed like an ordinary fast food joint. It made me realize that you never really know what's going on behind the scenes, what's lurking in the shadows of places we think we know so well. And sometimes, it's better not to find out.